everybody. Mark Levin here. Our number, 877-381-3811. 877-381-3811. There's lots going on. I'm just not going to jump into all the Obamacare stuff. We'll address it later, but you've heard about a lot of it, I'm sure, today. It's going beautifully. Exactly as planned. If this were North Korea. I want to do something, provide a little bit of context, then we'll move along here. It's Friday after all, and Fridays we like to, maybe approach things a little differently. Not necessarily, but from time to time. You see what's going on here in your country today. Let's step back and take a look at this. We have some guy now they appointed, former OMB director, says, with confidence, you just heard it, top of the news, those of you who get ABC. Those of you who don't, I'll just repeat it. This healthcare website will be up in 2 or 3 months, period. Now, we don't know who this guy is, but apparently this guy now is in charge of our healthcare, along with other faceless, nameless people, along with other people we don't know, and yet our fate is supposed to rest with them. The brilliance of the American founding, the brilliance of our founding documents, is that for the first time in human history, well, let me put it to you this way, for the first time in governing human history, a couple of dozen men got together in Philadelphia and said, you know what, we don't know everything. We can't manage all of society. You know what? We shouldn't manage all of society. We shouldn't even try. And for the first time in governing human history, they said, as a matter of fact, we need to set up a governing system which, as best as we can, prevents future politicians from exercising their imaginations, their will, this power in such a way, if they think they can. It was really a remarkable thing. You see, America was brand new. No, I'm not talking about Native Americans versus colonies versus states. But this concept of a federal government with limited powers, the purpose of which is to preserve the civil society, not devour it, not destroy it. The purpose of which was to have a stable and just law, to promote those attributes that experience tell us creates a healthy, a vibrant, a free society. These were the things of the founding and the framers. By the way, Mr. Perdue, is there a cult of personality or something going on our favorite cable channel this week? On Fox? I mean, no offense, and I like Dr. Krauthammer, but good Lord. Anyway, where was I? So the opposite of what our founders and later our framers tried to establish is what's going on today. And it's so irrational that, yes, it's laughable, but it's also dangerous. A relative handful of people get elected to public office, conduct themselves outside our governing document, the Constitution, claim that they have these powers because they were elected, and of course the election has nothing to do with the Constitution. They're required to comply with it, period. As a matter of fact, once elected, they're required to take an oath to follow it. The election doesn't alter the Constitution in any respect. Then they have an army of millions who they call upon to do all the, all the intricate work, to handle all the details. Nobody really knows what anybody's doing. So we have a president, as an example, who talks about these great visionary programs and makes these great visionary promises. And beyond that, he has no idea how this thing settles out. And it's not just his incompetence and disinterest, because that certainly exists. But it's the fact he can't possibly know. There's way too much information that has to be collected, and way too much information because most of it can't be collected to make rational decisions in a centralized way about our healthcare system. The framers would have understood this. But the thing is, it doesn't matter. Those who are doing this to us, for them, their ideology is cult-like. They are fanatics. So they are fanatics in their hatred for dispersed decision-making, for individual free will, for the very things that our framers acknowledged and established in this country, which made our founding so remarkable in human history. Let me take it a step further. Mark, you're getting so philosophical. Oh, we can handle this. I'm just trying to put things in perspective. The Great Enlightenment, the Enlightenment of Europe, the Scottish Enlightenment, the French Enlightenment, and so forth. These were men, in one way or another, who came to the realization that man is imperfect. And yet, man is different than all other beings, all other creatures. And why is that? Mostly because man can rationalize based on his experience. Man is different. And so they spend a lot of brain power, a lot of their lives, developing this understanding of man, man's knowledge, man's capacity to learn. And so what the framers did is they took from the Enlightenment these great thinkers. We've talked about some of them, but others too. We've talked about John Locke and Charles de Baron Montesquieu, but there were others, David Hume, and more and more and more. And the point is that they tried to understand man's nature. They tried to understand how to take the best of human experience and apply it to this new, magnificent country. This country which had never had a government, a one form of government, ruling over all of it. It wasn't even a country for so many decades, so many centuries. And look at how we're throwing it all away. We are throwing it all away. What's going on today isn't new. What's going on with Obama and Harry Reid and the bureaucracy isn't new. Framers were well aware of the capacity for tyranny. What's going on today is as old as Plato's Republic and before. It's as old as Plato's Republic and before. Plato saw the dissolution of his country, and he was trying to deal with it. He saw the murder, in essence, if you will, of Socrates, his mentor, even though Socrates was forced to commit suicide. Plato's pupil, who would become somewhat of a critic later, was Aristotle. And he struggled with these issues too. He saw what was happening to his country, and they saw the weakness of democracy, little d democracy, under certain circumstances. They saw the weakness of politicians under certain circumstances, particularly Athens and Greece more broadly. Our framers of the Constitution, those who went to Philadelphia, 1787, many of those who met in the state capitals to debate the ratification of the Constitution, they read a lot of Plato, and Plato's Republic in particular. They read a lot of Aristotle. They had a working knowledge of John Locke and Montesquieu and Hume and so many others. While they didn't agree on everything, that's for sure. In fact, they fought hard. The Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, among others. They did agree on this. That a centralized government would destroy the spirit, the nature of this country and its citizens. That a centralized government with ever-expanding power would destroy everything they tried to establish. And they warned us. They warned us. They told us that, yes, they're setting up this truly unique wonderment, this federalism system in the United States of America. But if men who are in high office cease to have virtue, then nothing they do can stop the coming tyranny. Nothing they do can stop the coming tyranny. This battle over Obamacare, as well as these other issues, but Obamacare in particular right now, this is a battle about more than health care, although that's bad enough. It's a battle about more than the relationship between the individual and government, although that's bad enough. This is a battle over liberty versus tyranny. It's that simple. I'll be right back. You see, folks, what we call liberalism isn't liberalism at all. I call it utopian statism. Call it progressivism. Call it whatever you want. Fundamentally, it is a rejection of the Enlightenment. It rejects the notion that individuals have unalienable rights. It rejects human nature. And it rejects the idea that most individuals who are free to enter into associations voluntarily, most individuals, when left to their own devices, I mean, you have a rule of law and criminal laws and so forth, but most individuals are to be trusted with their own fate. And some of you folks listening to me right now, most of you won't, but some of you are going to say, well, what about the poor? What about the... And that's the point. It's one thing to be poor in a country like America, or at least historically, getting harder and harder due to the utopian status, but at least in America, you can, in fact, lift yourself up by your bootstraps and make something of yourself. And there's so many examples they can't even be cataloged. One generation to the next. That's why immigrants, legally and illegally, come to this country, for the most part. But in authoritarian regimes, and you can have a legislature, a Congress, and have an authoritarian regime. Poor people are created. Poor people are in a hopeless environment. That's the key difference. When you're in a relatively free society, the goal is to allow people to escape their condition if they wish to escape their condition. In an authoritarian society or a totalitarian society, whatever its makeup, it doesn't matter. Because the government doesn't exist for the people. The people exist for the government. And if they're toiling in the rice fields for the rest of their lives, that's their problem. Because human beings cease to be human beings. Now, I want you to project that onto Obamacare. We're not even talking about human beings anymore. We're talking about a website. We're talking about statistics. We're talking about government bureaus and committees. We're talking about contractors being called in to fix this. We're talking about the former OMB director to do that. We're not talking about the people. What's in the best interests of the people? To reject the Enlightenment? To reject human experience, both with societies and individuals and centralized governments? They've been talking about a fool's errand a lot on Capitol Hill, although they've misplaced that term and have applied it to people who are actually trying to stand up and defend our liberty. But fool's errand. This entire Obamacare spectacle is a fool's errand. We know how it's going to end. It's a disaster. But even more, we know the damage it is doing to families across the nation, and we know the damage it's doing to our governing structure and to our liberty, bottom line. This is a fool's errand, and even worse. Obamacare is a complete rejection of the Enlightenment. It is a complete rejection of what took place in Philadelphia in 1787. It is a complete rejection of the state ratification conventions in the capitals of the states that existed at the time. It's a rejection of the notion of unalienable rights. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. It seeks to crush them all. So here we are, a great nation, reduced to talking about a website. Here we are, a great people, to whom our framers, through the Constitution, empowered us to vote for our leaders. And yet, our leaders believe we're incapable of making decisions for ourselves. I'll be right back. Now, if you're able to hear the first 30 minutes, I want to play a few clips, and you've heard some of these before, of Barack Obama making promises about his health care and your health care. And not just listening to the lies, but listen to it a little differently now. Listen to it like the President of the United States is telling me what I can keep, and put that in the context of what our country is supposed to be. The President of the United States telling you what you can keep. So in other words, even if everything he said had been true, you should be offended by it. You should be disgusted by it. Because the President of the United States should have nothing to do with it. So listen to it in that context. Yes, they're flat-out lies, and he knew they were flat-out lies. He didn't care, because remember what I said. You are serving his purposes. He's not your servant, you're his servant. So we have the entire notion of our society turned on its head, and that's what's happening today. So take a listen, Mr. Producer, go right through the lot of them, starting with Cut 5. Go.
But I'm also committed to ensuring that whatever plan we design upholds three basic principles. First, the rising costs of health care must be brought down. Second, Americans must have the freedom to keep whatever doctor and health care plan they have, or to choose a new doctor or health care plan if they want it. And third, all Americans must have quality, affordable health care.
No matter what you've heard, if you like your doctor or health care plan, you can keep it. If you don't have insurance, you'll finally be able to afford insurance. And everyone will have the security and stability that's missing today.
If you like your current insurance, you will keep your current insurance. No government takeover. Nobody's changing what you've got if you're happy with it. If you are among the hundreds of millions of Americans who already have health insurance through your job, or Medicare, or Medicaid, or the VA, nothing in this plan will require you or your employer to change the coverage of the doctor you have. Let me repeat this. Nothing in our plan requires you to change what you have.
And if you already have health insurance, we will lower your premiums by $2,500 per family per year. And if you can't afford it, we will subsidize your care, and we will emphasize prevention so we have a health care system instead of a disease care system.
If we don't pass it, here's the guarantee. Your premiums will go up. Your employers are going to load up more costs on you. Potentially they're going to drop your coverage because they just can't afford an increase of 25, 30% in terms of the cost of providing health care to employees each and every year. And the federal government will go bankrupt because Medicare and Medicaid are on a trajectory that are unsustainable. And this actually provides us the best chance of starting to bend the cost curve on the government expenditures of Medicare and Medicaid. So anybody who says that they are concerned about the deficit, concerned about debt, concerned about loading up taxes on future generations, you have to be supportive of this health care bill, because if we don't do this, nobody argues with the fact that health care costs are going to consume the entire federal budget.
Our approach lowers the government's health care bills by reducing the cost of health care itself. Already the reforms we passed in the health care law will reduce our deficit by $1 trillion. The plan will not add to our deficit. The middle class will realize greater security, not higher taxes. And if we are able to slow the growth of health care costs by just 0.1% each year, 0.1%, it will actually reduce the deficit by $4 trillion over the long term. My proposal would bring down the cost of health care for millions. Families, businesses, and the federal government. Our cost-cutting measures mirror most of the proposals in the current Senate bill, which reduces most people's premiums and brings down our deficit by up to $1 trillion over the next 2 decades. Brings down our deficit.
All right, there's a lot more where that came from. Now, that is a damning montage of audio clips of the president damning himself after the fact with flat-out lies, serial lies, on every subject he talked about related to health care. The individual, the doctor, the cost curve, your policies, and on and on and on. Just flat-out lies. But more than that, if you listened with the ear that I suggested you listen with, to have somebody stand up there and go on and on about what you can keep, what you're going to get, what he's going to do to you and for you, and it's in every damn one of these clips, every damn one of these speeches, on and on and on. I say to you, ladies and gentlemen, have we rejected the Enlightenment? Have we rejected completely our founding? Must we now rely on one individual or a group of individuals who lie incessantly as they must? Must we rely on them for our sustenance, for our future? And now here we are, a great nation, debating a website? We don't debate the Constitution anymore. We don't talk about liberty anymore, private property rights. None of that's discussed. None of it. And when you do raise it, you're attacked. The few of us who even mention it, oh, you must be an extremist. Oh, that's just not realistic. The welfare state is, as I say, imploding and expanding at the same time, and I'm unrealistic? We've reached a point of governmental insanity. Why would we reject our heritage? Why would we reject the most magnificent coming together of individuals to create this society, this government? Why would we resist it rather than embrace it? Rather than the corrupt thinking and the corrupt actions of big centralized government. And who speaks for us? What institution speaks for us? What political party speaks for us? That's the question. As best I can tell, none of them. As best I can tell, none of them. So yes, we can, and I will in the future, as I have in the past, talk about a website. Yes, we can talk about this contractor or that contractor. Yes, we can talk about an 800 number if we want. Yes, we can go into the weeds and talk about all these things. But the fact of the matter is, if we don't come out of the weeds and breathe life back into our heritage, we're going to be stuck in the weeds, which is exactly where they want us. Let me tell you a little secret. This Obamacare is changing the lives of millions of you, millions and millions of Americans, in a miserable way, despite the propaganda coming out from the governing masterminds of the ruling class, the professional politicians and the parasites who feed off of them, telling us, it's just wonderful, 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 when you know it's not. So while you are affected in a miserable way, in a fundamental way, let me tell you who's not affected. Obama. He will get the health care the minute he needs it, when he needs it, because of who he is. So will his wife, so will his kids. Let me tell you who's not affected. Biden and his wife and his family, because he's the vice president. Let me tell you who else is unaffected by this disaster. Every member of the United States Congress and their families are unaffected because they're going to be taken care of. Let me tell you who else is unaffected. Every cabinet secretary in this administration, because they and their families are going to have access to the health care what that they believe they need when they believe they need it. And let me tell you who else is unaffected. People who can pay cash for their health care. Yes. But let me tell you who's affected in the most disastrous way. Millions and millions of you. Of you. I don't care what your party is. I don't care what your philosophy is. You. Because it is you who needs to be controlled. And we now have reached a point where we absolutely do work for the federal government. And you can hear this in Harry Reid's voice and in his message, that taxes need to go up for the rich. Ladies and gentlemen, the vast majority of you are not rich by any definition the government creates, or the IRS creates. I've talked about this before, all this class warfare stuff where the government turns one citizen against another by grouping us into these economic categories that they create. And they change all the time whenever they need to change them to rile us up and to create jealousies and so forth. So a millionaire used to earn $1 million. Today a millionaire earns $300,000. But whatever. We don't have a caste system in this country. We don't have a class system in this country. And yet they keep preaching that. And here's the bottom line. What we do have in this country is the people and the ruling class. That we do have. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. We fight Obamacare to protect our families, their well-being, so they do have access to medical care when they need it. The best care man has ever been able to provide, which is under attack. But we attack Obamacare for another reason. To preserve what sovereignty we have left as individuals. To preserve what power we have left as citizens. That's why we attack it also. I don't mean to go all philosophical in the first 45 minutes. Well, yes, I do, actually. Yes, I do. Because this is bigger than another talking head coming to you going on and on about the website and who made the website and who's connected to whom and so forth and so on. We tend to lose the big picture. Now let's go to Amy, Tulsa, Oklahoma, the great KFAQ. Go.
Hi, I'm Amy, and my boyfriend and I listen to your show all the time, and we just love that you are such an advocate for all the patriots of America that are so through with all of the lies that the liberals just like to float on and like to, I don't know if it's a fantasy land that they live in, but this is the reality. And what's happening in America is devastating. And we are saddened every day. We talk about it. We listen to your show. And it's what you do helps put the word out there, because it's a fight every single day when we're at home just trying to, fill people with the actual truth, and they still, for some reason, just cling on to those lies as if it's the only thing that's keeping them going.
Well, you're very, very kind. Now, Amy, let me ask you a question. How old are you?
I'm 23.
And how old's your boyfriend?
29.
And I'm saying that because I want other people to know who call this program sometimes and say, oh, that generation is dead. That generation is no good. You're out there fighting, right?
Yes. I hate when they say the younger generation doesn't know anything. We try to educate ourselves every single day. We watch the news. We listen to talk radio because we want to know the truth. Why go and blindly just vote and blindly, go and believe into something if you don't know the facts? Mm-hmm.
Well, you've made my day very, very sharp. I appreciate that, Amy. God bless you, my friend.
Thank you. God bless you as well.
All right. My kids are the same way. My daughter's 25 and a half. My son is 22 and a half. And they embrace our heritage. They embrace liberty. They embrace these things. And Amy there, she's 23, same thing. And her boyfriend's 29. Yeah, there's hope if we embrace them and we spread the word. But I'll tell you what, if you sit home and watch the Sunday shows and you sit home and watch TV, these cable shows all day, and if you allow yourself to be caught in that mindset, top-down, Washington government-centric mindset, well, that's what's going to happen. But if you think for yourself and understand that this Constitution is yours, take a look at it. It's magnificent. This Declaration of Independence is yours. Take a look at that, too. It is magnificent. And you'll have the haters and the authoritarians and the utopian statists and the manipulators, the ruling class. They're all going to want to point to, well, what about this in America and that in America and all these other things in America? And yet it's an amazing thing, is it not? What a melting pot America is, or at least used to be. It's an amazing thing. We don't stop people from leaving, but they won't leave. We barely stop people from coming, and they won't stop coming. And that's the test. People speaking with their feet. It's such a magnificent country, I tell you. I hope it lasts, but there is no guarantee of perpetuity. I really do hope it lasts. I'm not sure. But if it doesn't, I am sure of one thing. Hundreds of years from now, people are going to look back on this country. They're going to look back on this generation. And they're going to say, what the hell did you do? What the hell did you do? With all the tyranny and misery and the genocide and all the rest throughout the earth, you took the most magnificent country on the face of the earth and you delivered it to tyrants? I'll be right back. Hello, everybody. Mark Levin here. Our number, 877-381-3811. 877-381-3811. And so, continuing from the first hour, what I try to do here, and what I hope there can be more of, is to engage on a different level than Washington speak. And I'll give you another example. You got to think, as I say, not so much outside the box, but exclude the mindset that comes through your TV screen from all these shows and talkers and all the rest of it. And I've talked about this many, many times, and I've written about it. I've talked about it as recently as yesterday, as a matter of fact. Many people, many conservatives seem to think the world began with the New Deal. And they think those of us who talk about resurrecting our heritage, our founding, are kind of out of it. And that's not conservative, you see. So they're redefining conservative, and that's what liberals do in their ilk. But I want you to think about this. For the vast majority of Americans, you can hit a switch, and what happens? You get electricity. For the vast majority of Americans, you turn on a faucet and you get clean water. You flush a toilet and you get rid of refuse. For the vast majority of Americans, you need oil or propane or natural gas. You get oil, propane, or natural gas. For the vast majority of Americans, you have a bank account. Some of you have a checking account. Some of you have a savings account. For the vast majority of Americans, you either own or lease an automobile, or you take public transportation. The automobile, trains, electricity, propane, natural gas, oil, rubber tires, electricity in your house whenever you need it, flush toilets, clean water from your faucets and your showers. All these things predate the New Deal. All these things are a result of the Industrial Revolution. Most of the things we take for granted in our households, at our place of work, predate the New Deal, predate the Great Society, predate Obamacare. Our magnificent healthcare system predates big government. We are constantly barraged with this propaganda that but for Franklin Roosevelt, that but for LBJ, that but for now Barack Obama, we'd be some kind of a throwback society. We'd all be living under trees. There'd be nothing left of us. When in fact the greatest industrial growth that any nation has ever seen on the face of the earth occurred prior to an all-powerful centralized government. Oh yes, there's imperfections. We understand that. But that's not my point. We were an advanced society, a progressing, evolving society, long before all the laws and regulations that came out of Washington, D.C. And yet, you're led to believe that without massive, centralized, ubiquitous, authoritarian government, we wouldn't know how to screw a light bulb in. We wouldn't know how to use a toilet. We wouldn't know how to turn on an automobile. We wouldn't be able to have clean air and clean water. We wouldn't be able to have relatively cheap fuel. We wouldn't be able to have automobiles and on and on and on. And yet we have, and yet in many respects we did. Let me take it a step further. These people act like and want you to believe that the only government in America is the federal government. Well, almost everybody listening to me, not everybody because we have territories and so forth, but almost everybody listening to me live in one of the 50 states or the District of Columbia. As I say, I know there's other areas, but I'm focused right now on this. So we have 50 state governments and the District of Columbia government. They pass laws all the time, don't they? They have departments, they have committees, they have offices, they have divisions, they levy taxes and user fees, they have inspectors, they have whatever it is, zoning laws and so forth and so on. So the idea that but for an all-powerful president and an all-powerful Congress and a massive bureaucracy and so forth, that somehow we wouldn't have quote-unquote regulations or what have you, is absurd. It's absurd. All right, let's take it to the third level. I want you to think beyond that. Imagine what's possible if the federal government wasn't destroying so much of our property, wasn't destroying so much of our wealth, wasn't intimidating us in so many ways, dispiriting us, obstructing us from actually pursuing our interests, our unalienable rights. I'm not talking about eliminating a just and stable law. Every civil society needs that. I'm well beyond that. I'm talking about massive regulations, one piled on top of the other. So many we don't even know how many there are. So many that the Congressional Research Service can't even tell us how many have criminal penalties. We can't even figure that out. And yet, you are compelled to comply with laws you're not even familiar with. Or you'll be fined or penalized and imprisoned. Imagine how much opportunity there might be, how much wealth creation there might be, how many jobs and enterprises, how many more inventions and products and services, how much more advanced we would be as a civil society. How many more people would be able to participate in a vibrant way? But for the iron fist of the federal government, directing us, tormenting us, obstructing us, reshaping us. Imagine the possibilities in a free society the same way our founders did. The same way the great captains of industry did. Imagine what would be possible. I'm not talking about anarchy. I'm not talking about eliminating government. We have very active, and in some cases way too active, local and state governments. But we also have a federal government. That's what the Constitution creates. A federal government, as I talk about over and over again and have written about. And it's got certain powers. Some of them are very powerful. Some of its authority. So who's talking about anarchy? Who's talking about eliminating government? We're talking about the proper role. The proper role of the federal government. But imagine what's possible. All the new medicines and technologies. Imagine. But for the government stealing money, taking money, confiscating money, just because somebody is quote-unquote rich, or just because somebody is involved in this industry or that industry. And politicians decide that they are to be punished for political purposes. Which brings me to my final point in this monologue. The next level. Why is it assumed that Barack Obama operates for noble purposes? Why is it assumed that politicians operate for noble purposes? Aren't they seeking votes? Aren't they seeking power? Aren't they pursuing some kind of utopian mission? Those aren't noble purposes. Why is it assumed that somebody in the private sector is not conducting him or herself for noble purposes? Why is it assumed that they have to be regulated in every aspect of their business, their workplace, or their life? Why is it assumed that the individual must be controlled and not the politician? And how can it possibly be that but for the fact that these individuals are in government, elected and unelected, that they are somehow better judges about human nature and wiser than all the rest of us who pay their way? Which brings us full circle back to the beginning. We conservatives embrace the Enlightenment. We embrace the notion that men and women have free will, and that men and women exercising that free will, for the most part, will be able to care for themselves and their neighbors and so forth. That man is different than animals, that man can rationalize, and man should learn from experience and build on that experience. And that a handful of individuals cannot possibly have the wisdom, the judgment, the information